my name is Alex Homer, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of security in the future workplace. And today I'm joined by Fujitsu's David Smith and Alex Matthews from VMware, both of whom know a few things or two about security in the workplace. So thank you for joining me. And what we're going to be talking about today is really about the employee and how there's lots of things that people need to consider in their working lives, and security is yet another one. And it's really difficult for us all to remember that security is so important sometimes. But how do we prioritise security without burdening people, without burdening employees with endless processes, policies, passwords, David?
I'd say it's one of the most important questions that enterprises are facing today. You take any one of our normal days, right? You know, we get up in the morning before we leave the house. We want to be able to check, calendar, check the address that we're going to. So maybe, do I take my work device out of the bag and power that up, or do I just grab my personal phone and look on the calendar on there? Carry on through the day. Let's say if I'm going to a client site, I want to be able to show them my presentation. I get to their video conferencing suite and they say, well, sorry, you can't plug in your corporate laptop here, right? You've got to put your files over onto our devices so that you can sort of share them on ours. Our security policy bans that. And you can sort of look at anybody's day in the life of, and you can see all of these different touch points that we have to work through, which require us to do things that us as IT security reps within our enterprises feel inherently insecure. So historically, what have we always done? We've come up with new security policies which say, well, let's ban personal devices, obviously, right? Because we can't allow people to have corporate data on those. Let's ban people using USB ports and plugging their laptops into corporate, other people's corporate networks, because we can't risk that there might be a virus on there. Oh, actually, as a security team, I remember, these people have to be able to work, so I should have an exception to those policies. I should permit people to be able to start to use these things. Okay, now 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, when everybody's requested the exception because we all need to do it, what happened to our policy? What's happened to that enterprise security? And we're finding that a lot of our enterprises are struggling to make that balance.
But there has to be a better way, David. There has to be something where we can intrinsically have security built into a management solution that allows the workers to have that consumer experience, but give our IT security professionals that security and compliance element so that they're confident that the solution is securing the data and the corporate assets for them. There must be a better way, David.
And do you know some examples of where there are some better ways there?
Ta-da! Yes, so magically, as if materialized out of nowhere, we have a much better way to do it today, don't we? Realistically, we want to be able to secure the devices for the corporate. We need to be able to make sure that we have a user experience. So to David's point, these are almost diametrically opposed views. I want a consumer-grade experience with the corporate wrapper for security, but they have to be intricately linked. And that's where we are today with the Fujitsu portfolio in particular, so that we can provide that seamless user experience, but we have the corporate wrapper from a security perspective to give that flexibility and policy-based approach.
But I would add there, it's still a tremendous challenge, right? We're used to working with, say from an enterprise point of view, our security teams are used to being able to write a policy document. Right, they write a long document, or maybe they convert that into a presentation. And we're used to forcing our employees once a year to review the security policies and trying to remember these things about the do's and don'ts of how they should use these corporate services. And so to start to evolve from, how do I go from that kind of a model where I sort of dictate, a list of, rules, a list of commandments, through to something a bit more dynamic, something which is a bit more, use case sensitive, something which acknowledges the way that people need to work. It's quite a change for us corporately and culturally within our security teams. So the tools are starting to come through, but we've still got a way to go in terms of the addressing some of the, the how do we apply that? What approach do we take to be able to break down that problem and convert that into something which we can apply to the tool to be able to then have it serve our enterprise?
Absolutely, and it's the people and the process elements of that cultural change which is almost more difficult to implement than the technology itself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about going to the point of understanding people's, role profiles, their personas. What do they do during that daily life, so that I can map out what's a reasonable course of behaviour. Today, historically, it's been much more a case of, almost a manual process. I'm designing security on a sort of a service by service or a system by system basis based off the access rights that I give to those users when they connect to that service. And that, again, it kind of works, but it's still kind of crude, right? If I'm going in to present to, a board level meeting and I want to check the most recent data for my financial systems before I go into that, from my hotel room before I get into the office in the morning, probably banned, right? But it should still be allowed because, as a user, that's my role. It's what I do and it's part of my normal workday. So how we then start to be able to, pull out the underlying data from these platforms and start to be able to understand, what people's roles are and how to apply some of this policy sensitively. That's something which I think we're just starting to come through now, really into our core tools and technologies.
I completely agree, and that context is so important. I need to be able to be productive, but we also need to be able to have that security and risk compliance element. So you're right, I should be able to access my corporate data in a hotel. I should also be able to access it at any time of day, not just the 9 to 5 element from my working life.
But it should just be according to your role, right? It needs to understand that that's kind of part of your role. It might not be part of someone else's, so we need to be able to detect who should have access, what's a normal pattern of behaviour, and be able to apply that on the fly.
This sounds like a different type of approach to how a lot of organisations and enterprises have typically driven their security policies. Would that be fair to say?
This is a radically different approach. And to David's point earlier, the people in the process element from an IT security perspective, it's a significant cultural shift. So what we're talking about is context-sensitive role profiles that can be dynamically created for different types of users accessing the same application. Now, if you tell that statement to a traditional IT security person, they will begin to cold sweat as they realise the implications that has for their daily lives, and how can I ensure that the right users are really accessing the right data. So this is a significant shift as we move into the new way of working.
Yeah, and I think though things are moving together, they're kind of converging there, because if we look at the new roles that we're seeing within enterprise IT, we're starting to see a lot more of a focus around there being somebody that owns the digital workplace experience on behalf of our employees. Somebody who's starting to try to shape the fact that employee experience should be that balance between security and personal productivity. We're starting to see people starting to think about the workflows, whether you want to call it the value streams for the certain roles that exist within our organisations. How do they add value to the customer engagements that they have? Start to map those out end to end. We do that a lot within our workplace assessments. But if we can start to map those and start to work with those new leaders of digital workplace experience, then we can start to design that end-to-end experience and start to build in the security, the context, and as Alex was saying earlier, start to be able to pull out the right bits of data so that we can start to detect, if something is fraudulent. If, for example, if you saw me connecting in from London, I seem to be in London a lot today. Oh, I'm in Moscow. I'm back in London again 10 minutes later. What happened there? Was there something there where somebody perhaps was trying to use my identity and get in? We can start to pull that data out now and start to apply security a lot more, a lot more context-sensitive way. But it really does start off understanding users, their roles, their personas, and their workflow. What makes them productive.
When you talk about sort of threat detection and monitoring there, David, and using a lot of the analytics behind what we're all producing using our workplace technology. But what about the user? We can't take away sometimes human error. Is there any sort of considerations that departments need to take into place to omit human error from workplace technology?
Completely. So if you think about where the workers are moving to be much more mobile, so I need to be productive wherever I happen to be in the world. That means I'm going to be using a lot more portable devices. There is a high tendency for some of those devices to get lost. In fact, let's look at the UK. Last year, over 20,000 mobile phones were stolen, lost, or otherwise separated from their owner. Well,
Mine might have been about 10 or 12 of those.
and likewise, yeah, a lot of my friends have been in the same camp.
Yeah.
But that means that high propensity of that environment is going to be corporately based devices. That means that I am giving away the keys to my kingdom in terms of how do my employees access my data, and how do we secure it if that mobile phone is parted from that user. So the ability to effectively remotely wipe or control those devices if they are reported lost or stolen is incredibly important. The same applies to any other type of mobile device, whether it's a laptop or a tablet, for example.
I think the main thing I was going to add to that really was around, you mentioned before about the importance of the user within that picture. So I think, again, the other things that we're starting to see now coming through as common technologies, both across mobile but also across desktops, is that level of self-service. So, let's say we had a corporate policy where, you can use your BYOD device, your personal device, but you have to register it. You have to bring it in and give it to an IT person who will add it into the system so that we can ensure that we've registered your device to you. Not going to work, right? Because if you lose your device, the last thing on your mind is about, well, I have to re-register it at work. You're going to go and get yourself a new device. You're going to get things up and running just as soon as you can so that you can get back on and use that device as part of your life, right? So we need to be enabling a lot more in the way of self-service so that people can just fluidly, as a part of that process of getting that new device and setting it up, just onboard that security picture completely seamlessly, something in the background that they're not even aware of. So designing that end user experience and that workflow needs to acknowledge human behavior, to point before, and it needs to be flexible to that. It can't put the burden of bureaucracy and security too much onto the end user, because if you've lost your mobile phone, you're in a stressful situation, right? The last thing you want to do is be confronted with a 30-page form to review and sign before you can start to get it back up and running again. I need to be running now.
Or even the better one where, in order to report a stolen device, I have to log on to the corporate page that requires me to have access from a device that I no longer have. There's an issue here somewhere. So we do need very user-friendly systems to be able to make this work.
Absolutely.
And who's responsible for that, though? This getting the end user experience right in the workplace, but also making it secure. Where do you see that responsibility lying?
Well, that's a really interesting one. So if you think about the traditional onboarding experience of an employee into a company, that was typically always HR's responsibility. And then they would at some point hand off to IT and say, I need some IT equipment. I need that person to be productive. And there was a clear line of demarcation between I've done my onboarding job and now it's over to IT. What we're seeing is it has to seamlessly come together. They have to have, from day zero, that onboarding experience powered by IT as HR takes responsibility for the life cycle of that employee. At the same time, you can't forget there's a user involved here as well. So you're looking at a three-way relationship from the HR, the IT, and the user's responsibility.
Well, I'd add to that as well. I think if we look at that old model where you had a central security team writing policy documents for everybody to either read or sign here, tick the box and pretend they've read, right? A lot of that ownership of that model was that the security guys would say, well, we don't own the risk, the business owns the risk. We can give you advice, and then it's up to the business if they want to take that advice or if they want to take the risk. And so that's a lot of the time where these exceptions came from, right? Because the security guys issued the policy, the line of business then said, well, that doesn't work for us, we're having an exception. I spoke a minute ago about the fact that the digital workplace experience design is now starting to come into the way that we provide employee services. We're starting to take the same approach to designing employee services as we would do if we were launching a commercial service, right? And that's great for the consumer. So as we spoke before about the understanding the user's role profile, understanding their value stream, their day in the life of experience, we can then start to design in security as a part of that workflow. And so as long as we're working with somebody like that sort of, head of end user experience or employee experience, that digital workplace owner, then we've got a point that we can work with to then start to design workflows that do work, for those people that are really generating revenue within our organization or helping us to add value.
Great. Well, if any of those people want to get in touch with us, then please do visit digitalworkplace.global.fujitsu.com. Find out more about our digital workplace services and the security that we can provide your organisation and your employees. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you both for joining me, and see you next time.